She believed love could transcend status, that dignity could be found even in the shadows of wealth, that her voice, soft but resolute, mattered enough to be heard. Instead, Lira Montemayor's final words were captured on a recording device no bigger than a matchbox, hidden beneath a potted plant in her employer's study. Words that would outlive her, but come too late to save her. Tonight, we uncover the chilling story of a woman who dared to document her own exploitation, whose death was erased with the same casual efficiency that erased her personhood, and whose voice, amplified only after her body washed ashore, would eventually shake the foundations of a kingdom built on silence. Naga City, Camarines Sur, Philippines. October 7, 2021. Rain lashed against the tin roof of a small concrete home in Barangay San Felipe, where 31-year-old Lira Montemayor sat at a weathered kitchen table with her younger brother Miko. Between them lay a recruitment brochure adorned with gleaming skyscrapers and palm trees. Dubai, your gateway to a better future. 2 years, Lira said, her finger tracing the contract details. That's all. By then, you'll be halfway through engineering school, and I'll have saved enough for us to maybe start something here. A small business. Something permanent. Miko, 16, stared at his sister's face, memorizing every detail, as if he already sensed their separation would stretch beyond the promised timeline. But you were supposed to be a teacher, 8. You were so close to finishing your degree. Lira's smile didn't reach her eyes. That was before typhoon marrying. Before Mama and Papa. She squeezed his hand. Some dreams we adjust. Some dreams we defer. But your education, that's non-negotiable. What neither could know was that this ordinary conversation, this sacrifice made by thousands of Filipino workers every year, would set in motion a chain of events ending not with a triumphant homecoming, but with a body washing ashore on a remote Dubai beach, unidentified for days, unclaimed but for the persistence of a teenage boy who refused to believe his sister had simply vanished. Lira Montemayor wasn't destined for this end. Born in 1990 to middle-class parents, her father a municipal clerk, her mother an elementary school teacher, she had spent 3 years at Ateneo de Naga University studying education when Typhoon Mering devastated their region in 2014. Both parents perished when floodwaters collapsed their home, leaving Lira as sole guardian to her then 9-year-old brother. She was brilliant, remembers Professor Maria Elena Deswicido, Lira's former education instructor. The kind of student who asked questions that made me reconsider my own understanding. She would have transformed any classroom lucky enough to have her. Instead of completing her degree, Lira took 3 jobs. Mornings as a cashier at a local bakery, afternoons tutoring wealthy children, evenings waiting tables at a tourist restaurant. For 7 years, she pieced together enough income to keep their small home and ensure Miko remained in school, where he displayed a remarkable aptitude for mathematics and science. My sister believed education was the only thing no one could take from you, Miko Montemayor told our investigators. She'd go without eating sometimes, but my school fees were always paid on time. My uniforms were always the newest thing we owned. By 2021, Miko had secured admission to the engineering program at Ateneo de Naga, the same university where his sister's education had been interrupted. But the tuition and living expenses far exceeded what Lira could earn locally, even working 7 days a week. The recruitment agency Sunrise Overseas Employment Solutions visited Naga City that October, promising tax-free salaries in the United Arab Emirates that tripled the local wage. The contract they offered domestic service for a prestigious Emirati family at $400 monthly plus room and board represented financial salvation. Within weeks, Lira had secured her passport, completed her medical examination, and signed a 2-year binding agreement that would place her in the household of Sheikh Zahir Al-Mansour. She was so excited when she got accepted. Her neighbor Luzviminda Regalado recalled. She kept saying this was Miko's chance to finish university without debt, that she'd endure anything for 2 years knowing it secured his future, and endure she would far more than she ever imagined. On January 15, 2022, Lira Montemayor arrived at Dubai International Airport. After a 9-hour flight, she emerged exhausted into terminal heat that stole her breath. A driver in a crisp white uniform held a sign with her name, the first and last time her name would be publicly displayed during her time in Dubai. The recruitment agency had arranged her placement with Sheikh Zahir Al Mansour, a 45-year-old member of Dubai's Emirate Council with extensive holdings in global logistics. His wealth, conservatively estimated at $120 million, placed him in the comfortable middle tier of Dubai's elite society. Not royalty, but connected enough to operate largely beyond scrutiny or consequence. His villa in Jumeirah, one of Dubai's most exclusive coastal neighborhoods, sprawled across 12,000 square feet of meticulously landscaped luxury. 8 bedrooms, 11 bathrooms, 3 kitchens, indoor and outdoor pools, and a rose garden that featured 76 varieties imported from gardens worldwide. Lira's first impression, captured in a text to Miko, reflected stunned disbelief. "It's bigger than our whole neighborhood. The kitchen alone could fit our entire house." Beneath this opulence lay carefully designed invisible spaces, the staff quarters tucked beneath the main structure, windowless except for narrow slits near the ceiling that admitted thin rectangles of light but offered no views. 6 identical rooms, each measuring 8 by 10 feet, with shared bathrooms down a narrow hallway. No mirrors adorned these walls, a deliberate omission explained to new staff as preventing distractions from duties. Lira's room contained a single bed, a small dresser, and a shelf where she arranged the few personal items she'd brought. A dog-eared copy of The Little Prince, a gift from her mother, a small wooden cross, and 3 photographs her parents on their wedding day, Miko at his high school honors ceremony, and the small house in Naga City that remained her definition of home. The household staff included 7 people: 2 maids, a cook, a driver, 2 security guards, and a groundskeeper. All were from South or Southeast Asia, primarily the Philippines and Indonesia, with the Moroccan cook Yasmin being the notable exception. All understood the unwritten rules governing their existence. Remain invisible unless called upon, anticipate needs without being told, and never, ever complain. The silence was what struck me most when I first arrived. Lira wrote in a letter to Miko 3 weeks after her arrival. Not peaceful silence like at the chapel back home. This silence feels heavy, like everyone is holding their breath, waiting for permission to exhale. Sheikh Zahir's household operated under strict hierarchies. Staff addressed him only when spoken to. Domestic workers kept eyes downcast during interactions. Personal questions were forbidden. Even among themselves, staff maintained careful distance. Close relationships between employees were discouraged through rotating schedules and separate mealtimes. Yet within this stratified environment, Lira gradually noticed Sheikh Zahir's attention focusing on her with increasing frequency. Unlike the previous household staff, he bothered to pronounce her name correctly. He asked about her hometown, nodded with apparent interest when she mentioned her brother's studies. "I think he respects hard work," Lira wrote to Miko in March 2022. "Yesterday he left an envelope with extra money on my cleaning cart. 500 dirhams with a note saying, 'For your brother's books.' That's almost a week's salary as a bonus." What Lira interpreted as respectful recognition was the first thread in a complex web of manipulation. The extra money, investigators would later conclude, was calculated to create precisely the gratitude and loyalty it successfully generated. Each subsequent kindness, requesting Lira specifically to serve his evening tea, complimenting her attention to detail, asking her opinion on household arrangements, further established his position as benevolent authority rather than mere employer. This pattern of selective attention is classic grooming behavior, explains Dr. Amina Rashid, a forensic psychologist specializing in exploitation cases. For someone who has been rendered socially invisible, even basic recognition feels like exceptional kindness. The initial boundary crossing appears as favor rather than violation, specifically because the power imbalance is so pronounced. By summer 2022, Lira's role had expanded beyond her contract. Initially hired as a general household worker, she now served as Zahir's personal assistant, managing his domestic schedule, preparing his private quarters, and attending to his specific preferences. The other staff noticed the distinction. Her quarters were upgraded to a slightly larger room, her schedule adjusted to align with his, her duties increasingly concentrated around his personal needs. "He told me I'm the only one who anticipates what he needs," She confided in a rare phone call to her brother in September. He says the others just follow orders. But I understand what makes a home feel peaceful. This praise came in striking contrast to the virtual invisibility of Sheikh Zahir's wife, Sheikh Noura, a distant, elegant woman who spent much of her time traveling between spiritual retreats and shopping excursions in London. Her presence in the villa was marked primarily by the elaborate preparations required before her arrivals and the palpable relief following her departures. When the Sheikha visits, the whole house holds its breath, Lira wrote in her personal journal, a small notebook hidden beneath her mattress. Every surface must gleam. Every flower must be perfect. Sheikh Zahir becomes someone else entirely, formal, distant, impatient. They speak in whispers I cannot understand. They never touch, not even their hands in passing. This observation, seemingly insignificant at the time, would later provide critical context for the tragedy unfolding around her. The marital dynamics she witnessed, the cold formality, the separate lives, the performance of connection rather than its reality, created the environment where her own exploitation became not just possible but inevitable. In November 2022, Lira made an entry in her journal that investigators would later identify as the first significant warning sign, a moment when admiration began its dangerous transformation into attachment. He sees me, not just my hands, my eyes. 5 words that captured both her vulnerability and the perilous validation she'd begun to crave. 5 words that would eventually cost her life. If you're finding this story compelling, hit that subscribe button and notification bell. The exploitation of domestic workers is one of the most underreported forms of abuse worldwide, and your support helps us continue bringing these stories to light. As 2022 drew to a close, Lira's position in the Al Mansour household seemed secure. Her remittances to Miko arrived punctually every month, allowing him to focus entirely on his studies rather than working part-time like many of his classmates. Her employer's apparent respect offered a dignity rarely afforded to domestic workers. Her future, for the first time since her parents' death, contained more possibility than sacrifice. What she couldn't see, what no one in the household yet recognized, was that Sheikh Zahir Al Mansour had established a pattern long before Lira's arrival. 3 previous personal assistants had left his employment suddenly, their contracts terminated with generous severance packages and strict non-disclosure agreements. None had filed complaints. None had spoken about their experiences. They had simply disappeared back to their home countries, their silence purchased along with their labor. And now, Lira Montemayor was being prepared for a role whose script had been written and revised many times before, a role she did not yet understand but would soon inhabit completely. June 17, 2023. A Thursday afternoon of exceptional heat even by Dubai standards. The villa's cooling system hummed at maximum capacity as Lira arranged fresh flowers in Sheikh Zahir's private study, white jasmine and red roses, the combination he'd recently begun requesting daily. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, she watched the family's private car disappear through the security gate, carrying Sheikh Noura to the airport for her semi-annual spiritual retreat. These departures had become significant markers in the household calendar. For the next 6 months, Sheikh Noura would remain in Saudi Arabia, ostensibly deepening her spiritual practice while maintaining minimal contact with her husband. Her absence transformed the villa's atmosphere. The formality that accompanied her presence evaporated like morning dew under the desert sun. Sheikha left for her tour today, Lira wrote in her journal that evening. 6 months of peace for everyone. Sheikh Zahir already seems lighter. He smiled at breakfast, joked with the security staff. Even the air feels different. This periodic rhythm, 6 months of Sheikh Noura's austere presence followed by 6 months of her absence, had structured household life long before Lira's arrival. But this particular departure marked a critical turning point in her relationship with Sheikh Zahir. Within days, subtle changes became apparent. Zahir began lingering in spaces where Lira worked, reading in the salon while she dusted bookshelves, taking coffee in the kitchen while she prepared meals, working on his laptop in the garden while she tended to potted plants. His questions became increasingly personal. What had her childhood been like? Did she miss having her own family? What dreams had she abandoned to care for her brother? He asks me things no one has asked in years, she wrote on June 30th. Yesterday he wanted to know my favorite book, then laughed when I said, The Little Prince. He said it suits me, seeing what's essential but invisible to others. For a moment I forgot he was my employer. The careful professional distance Lira had maintained began dissolving through these seemingly innocent conversations. Sheikh Zahir, with practiced precision, positioned himself not as authority figure, but as fellow soul trapped by circumstance. A man of immense privilege yet profound loneliness, seeking genuine connection in a world of transactional relationships. I've never spoken to someone who listens the way you do, he told her one evening in early July as she served his tea. Everyone else hears my title, my name, my wealth. You hear me. The household staff is trained to listen carefully, sir, she replied, eyes still respectfully lowered. Look at me when you speak, he said softly. In this room, at least, we can be equals. This deliberate dismantling of formal barriers, the invitation to eye contact, the suggestion of equality, created an intoxicating illusion of exceptional status. For a woman whose existence had been defined by service and self-effacement, the promise of being recognized as fully human carried irresistible power. This reframing of hierarchy as special intimacy appears in countless exploitation cases, notes social psychologist Dr. Elena Santos. The powerful person presents the boundary violation as privileged access. Only you can see the real me, or we have a unique connection. The targeted individual, often isolated from protective relationships, experiences this singling out as validation rather than danger. By mid-July, their interactions had evolved beyond conversation. Sheikh Zahir began requesting Lira's presence in his study each evening after the rest of the household staff had retired. What began as serving tea extended to discussing his business concerns, reviewing family photographs, sharing poetry he'd written in private moments. The line between employee and confidant blurred further with each intimate disclosure. On July 26, 2023, the relationship crossed its final boundary. As Lira arranged roses in his study, a task once performed by the groundskeeper but now reserved for her alone, Sheikh Zahir approached from behind and placed his hands gently on her shoulders. Come with me, he said quietly. I want to show you something. He led her through the villa's silent corridors to the rose garden, a private sanctuary illuminated that night by a full moon that silvered the petals and transformed ordinary beauty into something otherworldly. There, surrounded by fragrances imported from gardens across the globe, he kissed her for the first time. If I were free, he whispered against her hair, I'd marry you. You're the only one who sees me. Not the title, not the wealth, just me. Later, in her journal, Lira would describe this moment with painful honesty. I didn't feel desire so much as wonder, that someone with everything could want something from me beyond my labor. I know it can't lead anywhere. I'm not naive. But for once, I'm not just hands cleaning a house. I'm a woman being chosen. This entry reveals the tragedy at the heart of their dynamic, not that Lira believed in fairy tale outcomes, but that even limited recognition felt like liberation after years of invisibility. She didn't expect marriage or lasting commitment. Her hope was far more modest, simply to matter as a human being rather than a function. Their relationship developed according to careful parameters established by Zahir. They met only in the East Wing guest suite, never his bedroom. My wife's spirit watches this house, he explained. But with you, I feel clean. Their encounters occurred only after the household was silent, typically between midnight and dawn. No gifts were exchanged that might create evidence, no written messages that could be discovered. They maintain the fantasy of transgressive love while simultaneously reinforcing absolute control, explains relationship therapist Dr. Samira Khalid. The secret nature of the relationship, ostensibly to protect both parties, actually serves to isolate the less powerful person from potential support while giving the controlling party deniability. Throughout this period, Lira continued sending money home faithfully. Her monthly remittances of $350 covered Miko's tuition, housing, and basic needs, while she retained only minimal amounts for personal necessities. Their weekly phone calls, now conducted from a private location Zahir provided for her comfort, maintained the fiction that her Dubai position remained strictly professional. "You sound different," Miko remarked during their call in early August. "Happier, maybe?" "The work is going well," she replied carefully. "My employer appreciates my efforts. It makes the days easier." What she didn't tell her brother was how completely her emotional landscape had transformed, how she measured days by moments in Zahir's presence, how his approval had become necessary to her sense of worth, how the distinction between professional validation and personal attachment had dissolved entirely. This emotional dependence developed alongside Zahir's increasing possessiveness. He rearranged household schedules to maximize her availability to him. He questioned her about interactions with the driver when she accompanied him on errands. He expressed displeasure when she spent her half-day off speaking with her brother rather than resting as he'd recommended. If you're disturbed by how gradually control can disguise itself as care, hit that like button. These patterns affect thousands of vulnerable workers who have no recourse when employment becomes exploitation. By September 2023, Lira's journal entries revealed the first cracks in her carefully maintained composure. "Something feels wrong," she wrote on September 11th. "Last night he spoke about his wife with such contempt. Said she's a necessary business arrangement, but that emotional connections like ours are life's true sustenance." It sounded rehearsed somehow, like words he's said before. This intuitive recognition that Zahir's seemingly spontaneous intimacies might actually be calculated and familiar created cognitive dissonance she struggled to resolve. Having anchored her sense of exceptionalism in his apparent recognition of her unique qualities, the suggestion that she might be interchangeable threatened her entire emotional framework. Then came the evidence she couldn't dismiss. On September 18th, while collecting laundry from the garage refrigerator, where household staff stored items requiring special cleaning, Lira discovered a saffron silk scarf, vibrant, expensive, fragrant with unfamiliar perfume. Not Sheikh Noura's austere preference for unscented black abayas. Not her own modest belongings. Someone entirely unknown. That same evening, she noticed a wine glass in the pool house with a distinct lipstick smudged crimson, unlike anything in her minimal cosmetic collection. "Maybe a relative visited," she wrote, the words on the page revealing her desperate attempt to maintain the narrative she'd accepted. "Maybe a business associate. Maybe a friend." But the seeds of doubt, once planted, germinated rapidly. She began noticing patterns. How Zahir's interest intensified when she showed independence and waned when she demonstrated devotion. How his work emergencies often arose after their most intimate moments. How his phone remained perpetually face down in her presence. Notifications silenced. The illusion maintained its form but lost its substance. Like a beautiful house whose foundation has begun to shift, every surface still perfect while the structure itself grows increasingly unstable. October brought the villa's newest staff member, Yasmin, a 27-year-old Moroccan cook with formal culinary training and a quiet, efficient presence. Unlike most staff hired through agencies, Yasmin came with personal recommendations from one of Zahir's business associates, an unusual pathway that granted her immediate status within the household hierarchy. Lira noted her arrival with professional interest but personal indifference. The new cook started today, Yasmin from Casablanca. Her Arabic coffee is apparently superior to what we've been serving. Sheikh Zahir seemed pleased with the change. What Lira couldn't know, what would only become clear in the final tragic chapter of her story, was that Yasmin's arrival represented not simply a staffing adjustment but the next iteration of a pattern in which she herself was merely the current embodiment. By November 2023, the relationship between Lira and Sheikh Zahir had established a painful rhythm familiar to anyone who has experienced intermittent reinforcement. Periods of intense connection followed by unexplained distance, passionate declarations undermined by contradictory behaviors, promises that evolved continuously without ever materializing. "I feel like I'm disappearing," Lira wrote on November 28th. "The more I give, the less I exist. Last night he said I'm essential to his happiness but couldn't look at me when he said it." His eyes kept checking his phone. The ultimate revelation, the moment that would transform Lira from victim to witness, occurred on December 12, 2023. While cleaning Sheikh Zahir's study during his morning business meetings, she accidentally bumped his desk, activating his tablet screen. A voice memo began playing automatically, filling the room with intimate words in his unmistakable cadence. "Come to the pool house at 1 a.m., my little Jasmine. I miss your hands." The voice was warm, familiar, the same tone he used in their private moments. But Jasmine was not his endearment for Lira. He called her his desert rose, claimed it suited her combination of beauty and resilience. For several seconds, she stood frozen, the cleaning cloth limp in her hand. Then, with methodical precision, she returned the tablet to its exact position and completed her duties as if nothing had changed. But everything had. "My heart didn't break today," she wrote that night in the final journal entry investigators would later recover. "It hardened. I realized I was never chosen. I was just available." If you're invested in Lira's story, hit that subscribe button and notification bell. In our next segment, we'll reveal how her awakening led not to escape, but to a desperate gamble, using the only weapon available to someone with no power: truth. Stay with us as the last recording continues. If you're just joining us, take a moment to subscribe. This isn't just another true crime story. It's a window into the invisible world of domestic workers whose lives and deaths rarely make headlines. Your support helps ensure that Lira Montemayor's story reaches those who need to hear it most. January 2024. A new year began in Sheikh Zahir Al-Mansour's villa with the familiar rhythms of wealth, elaborate dinner parties, business associates arriving in luxury vehicles, staff moving like shadows through rooms they maintained but never inhabited. For Lira Montemayor, however, something fundamental had shifted. The discovery of Zahir's message to Jasmine had transformed her perspective completely. "It's strange to move through the same spaces with entirely different eyes," she wrote in a letter to Miko, carefully edited to reveal nothing of her personal situation. "Sometimes we don't see things clearly until we're forced to look again." That forced clarity brought with it a terrible gift: observation. Where once Lira had perceived Zahir's attention as exceptional recognition, she now recognized patterns that had been invisible during her emotional entanglement. She began to notice his interactions with other female staff, the lingering touch when Fatima, the new Indonesian laundry aide, handed him his pressed shirts, the private conversations with Yasmin about menu planning that extended well beyond culinary concerns, the rotating assignment of which staff member would deliver his evening tea. "He has a type," she noted in her final journal entries, discovered later hidden beneath the floorboards of her room. "Young, alone, dependent on the job. Women who can't afford to say no. Women who might mistake attention for respect because respect has been so rare." This awakening came with crushing emotional consequences. Beyond the personal betrayal lay a more devastating recognition that her perceived exceptionalism had been merely self-deception. That far from being uniquely valued, she was part of an interchangeable sequence, chosen for vulnerability rather than virtue. The psychological damage in these situations extends beyond romantic betrayal, explains trauma specialist Dr. Nadia Rahman. It's the systematic dismantling of self-worth. Victims don't just lose a relationship, they lose the narrative that gave meaning to their sacrifice. They must confront not only exploitation but their own participation in the fiction that enabled it. By late January, Lira's emotional response had transformed from hurt to cold determination. She began documenting everything: small notebook entries recording times, dates, interactions between Zahir and various staff members. She noted which women received special assignments, which were invited to private spaces, which received extra compensation for unspecified services. On January 28th, she overheard a phone conversation that confirmed her suspicions. Zahir, believing himself alone in his study while Lira worked silently in the adjoining bathroom, spoke casually with a business associate. "Filipinas are loyal until they ask for marriage. Then they become problems. The Indonesian girl is simpler, just gifts, no promises. The Moroccan wants a business investment eventually, but that's manageable. Yes, I'm careful. These arrangements have expiration dates. That's why we use the agency contracts, clean endings, no complications." Lira stood motionless behind the partially closed door, dust cloth suspended in midair, as her employer reduced her and her colleagues to a cost-benefit analysis of sexual availability and financial demand. In that moment, the last remnant of her emotional attachment dissolved, replaced by a clarity that would ultimately lead to both her death and her posthumous vindication. The next day, using her half-day off, she visited a small electronics shop in Dubai's Al Satwa district, far from the luxury malls frequented by employers like Zahir. With nearly a month's savings, she purchased a matchbox-sized voice recorder with 32 gigabytes storage capacity, enough to capture approximately 72 hours of continuous audio. "I don't want revenge," she texted her friend Maricel, another OFW working in Abu Dhabi, in one of the few communications that would later provide insight into her mindset. "I just want enough leverage to leave with what I'm owed. Then I never want to see Dubai again." This message reveals Lira's strategic thinking, not the emotional reaction of a scorned lover, but the calculated response of a worker who recognized her precarious legal position. Under the kafala sponsorship system, leaving her employment without Zahir's written permission would render her instantly undocumented, subject to arrest, deportation, and forfeiture of all owed wages. Any formal complaint would be her word against that of a prominent Emirati citizen. Her only viable exit required leverage. For those watching who may be in similar situations of vulnerability, remember that documentation can be both protection and danger. If you're finding this story resonates with your experience, please seek assistance from official channels rather than confronting exploitative employers directly. And hit that subscribe button to support our continued coverage of these critical issues. Between February 3rd and February 24th, 2024, Lira strategically placed her recorder in locations throughout the villa, capturing approximately 18 hours of incriminating audio. With meticulous attention to detail, the same care she had once applied to Sheikh Zahir's household, she documented late-night summons to different staff members, rotating between Yasmin, Fatima, and herself. Explicit conversations about arrangements with previous employees. Drunken admissions about his marriage of convenience and his contempt for women who developed emotional attachments. A particularly damning conversation with his security chief about handling problems discreetly, should any staff member become troublesome. Most devastatingly, she recorded Zahir speaking directly about her to Yasmin in the pool house on February 18th. "She thinks I'd leave my lineage for her. As if a housekeeper could ever be more than a warm body in the dark. These Filipino girls read too many fairy tales. They actually believe love crosses these boundaries. It's almost cruel how easily they convince themselves." The recorder captured Yasmin's uncomfortable laughter, then Zahir's continuation. "Don't worry, Habibi. Each one thinks she's the only one, the special one. By the time they realize differently, their contracts are nearly finished. A bonus payment, a good recommendation, and they disappear gratefully. The calculated nature of this exploitation is what's most disturbing," notes migration rights attorney Fatima Al-Sharif. "It's not impulsive or opportunistic, but systematic, a predatory pattern that specifically targets women with limited legal protections and pressing financial obligations. The perfect victims from a predator's perspective." As February drew to a close, Lira began implementing the second phase of her exit strategy. She established a cloud storage account under a name unrelated to her identity. Each night, she uploaded the day's recordings, setting automated security protocols. If she failed to log in for 3 consecutive days, access would automatically be granted to an email address belonging to Yasmin. "I chose her because she's the newest," Lira explained in a final voice memo to herself, later recovered from the cloud account. "She hasn't been completely drawn into his manipulation yet. And she has more protected status than the rest of us, connections through his business partners. If something happens to me, she might actually be safe enough to do something with this information." This precautionary measure revealed Lira's growing awareness of the danger her documentation created. Unlike many victims who believe evidence will protect them, she recognized that in Dubai's stratified legal system, evidence against powerful men could become a death sentence rather than protection. By March 1st, she had compiled enough material to draft a message to Sheikh Anura. Your husband is using his position to exploit vulnerable women in your household. I have audio evidence of his actions and admissions. I don't seek scandal or revenge, only enough compensation to leave quietly and support my brother's education. 60,000 dirhams, approximately $16,000, would cover my remaining contract, end-of-service benefits, and silence. This message, found in her draft folder but never sent, demonstrated Lira's pragmatic approach. The amount requested represented less than what she was legally entitled to for full contract completion plus standard severance, yet would allow her immediate return to the Philippines with enough to secure Miko's remaining education. She didn't seek punitive damages or exposure, just escape. On March 10, 2024, believing Sheikh Zahir would be attending meetings outside the villa, Lira made her fatal miscalculation. She placed the recorder in a potted plant near his study desk, positioning it to capture his scheduled afternoon call with a business partner known to be involved in the same exploitation patterns. This evidence would complete her documentation, providing corroboration from multiple sources rather than isolated incidents. What Lira couldn't know was that Zahir had canceled his external meetings that morning. What she couldn't anticipate was that he would return to his study unexpectedly, seeking a document forgotten during his hasty departure the previous evening. What she couldn't foresee was that in retrieving the file, he would notice the slight displacement of his favorite orchid, a disruption to the precise order he demanded in his personal spaces. Security footage, later recovered despite attempts to delete it, shows Sheikh Zahir at 2:17 p.m. on March 10th, standing completely still at his desk, holding the small black recorder in his palm. For 12 minutes, he remained motionless, his expression transitioning from shock to rage to a cold calculation that should have triggered alarms throughout the household. Then, with deliberate calm, he returned the device to its hiding place, straightened his jacket, and exited the room with no visible indication of his discovery. This decision to leave the recorder, rather than confront its owner immediately, marked the beginning of Lira Montemayor's countdown to death. Over the next 3 days, Sheikh Zahir would orchestrate her elimination with the same methodical attention he brought to his business acquisitions. No impulsive violence, no emotional confrontation, just the careful removal of an inconvenient problem. For those following Lira's story, what happens next demonstrates the ultimate danger faced by vulnerable workers who dare to document their exploitation. Hit that notification bell to receive Act 4 immediately upon release, where we'll reveal exactly how Sheikh Zahir transformed Lira from witness to victim, and how her voice would ultimately reach beyond her silencing. March 11th to 13th, 2024. While Lira Montemayor continued her household duties, unaware that Sheikh Zahir had discovered her recording device, a calculated endgame was already in motion. Phone records obtained months later would reveal a series of calls between Zahir and a private security consultant named Khalid Al-Farsi, a former intelligence officer known for problem resolution among Dubai's elite. Their conversations, deliberately conducted on burner phones rather than their regular numbers, focused on what Zahir described as a personnel extraction, requiring absolute discretion. Payment records would later show a transfer of 250,000 dirhams, approximately $68,000, from one of Zahir's shell companies to an unmarked account in the Cayman Islands, the price of erasing a human life. During these critical days, Zahir's behavior toward Lira displayed no sign of his discovery or intentions. He maintained their established patterns, requesting her service at meals, assigning her personal tasks, even continuing their physical relationship on the evening of March 12th. This calculated normalcy served two purposes: preventing her from suspecting danger and establishing his typical treatment of her should questions arise later. This level of psychological control is particularly chilling, observes criminal psychologist Dr. Karim Nasri. The ability to maintain perfect normal appearances while orchestrating someone's murder indicates not passion or impulse but predatory calculation. It suggests previous experience with high-stress deception. On March 13th, security cameras captured Zahir removing the recording device from his study at 7:14 a.m. after confirming Lira was occupied in the kitchen preparing breakfast. He spent approximately 40 minutes in his private office, time investigators believe he used to review the full contents of her recordings. At 8:03 a.m., Footage shows him replacing the device in the potted plant, its position minutely adjusted to appear undisturbed. At 9:30 a.m., Zahir summoned Lira to his study, the same room where her recorder continued capturing audio, including what would become their final conversation. "Lira, I've received disturbing news," he began, his voice conveying practiced concern. "Your brother Miko has been hospitalized. Some kind of accident at his university." The audio captures her sharp intake of breath, the immediate shift in her priorities. "Is he okay? What happened? I need to call him." "I've already arranged everything," Zahir continued smoothly. "You'll fly home tonight. Emergency family leave. All expenses covered. My driver will take you to the airport at 10 p.m. But I need to pack to organize. Already handled. Your suitcase will be prepared. Just focus on getting to your brother." This careful orchestration, the manufactured emergency, the rush timeline, the elimination of any opportunity for her to contact Miko directly or communicate with other staff, revealed the predatory sophistication of Zahir's plan. By framing her departure as both urgent and temporary, he prevented the questions that a formal termination might raise. What Zahir couldn't control were Lira's established safety protocols. During her brief lunch break, she logged into her cloud account, noting in her final update, "Emergency return to Philippines. Z says Miko hospitalized, but something feels wrong. Haven't been able to reach him directly. If no update within 3 days, something has happened to me." This digital breadcrumb, her final act of self-protection, would ultimately ensure that while Zahir could eliminate Lira, he could not erase her testimony. At 10:07 p.m., security cameras recorded Lira entering Zahir's private vehicle, a black Mercedes with tinted windows, carrying only a small handbag. The suitcase supposedly packed for her never appears in any footage. The driver, later identified as Nasir Aldari, a personal security contractor rather than Zahir's regular chauffeur, closed her door and proceeded not toward Dubai International Airport, but in the opposite direction, toward the remote desert region near Al-Awar. Official records would later show Lira signing out of the villa's security log at 11:47 p.m., listing emergency family leave as her reason for departure. A document forensic experts would confirm contained a forged signature created after her removal from the property. If this clinical description of a woman being led to her death disturbs you, it should. Hit that like button to help this story reach others who need to understand the vulnerabilities facing millions of domestic workers worldwide. What happened next has been reconstructed through partial confessions, cellular location data, and forensic evidence. The Mercedes drove approximately 47 kilometers outside Dubai to an isolated area near the Oman border. There, 2 additional men, later identified as former military personnel working as private security contractors, waited in a separate vehicle. At approximately 12:30 a.m. on March 14th, Lira Montemayor was removed from the Mercedes. Whether she was already unconscious or became aware of her danger in those final moments remains unknown. What forensic evidence later confirmed was that she suffered a severe blow to the posterior skull, likely from a heavy object such as a metal pipe or hammer, resulting in immediate unconsciousness and death within minutes. Her body, still dressed in the simple black uniform she wore for household duties, was wrapped in plastic sheeting, weighted with concrete blocks, and transported approximately 70 kilometers to the coastal area near El Mamzar. Shortly before dawn, the 3 men loaded her remains onto a small fishing boat and deposited her approximately 2 kilometers offshore in the Arabian Gulf. The methodology indicates professional execution rather than crime of passion, notes former Dubai police investigator Ibrahim Al-Nasser, who reviewed the case files independently. The remote location, the body disposal technique, the absence of sexual assault or torture, these suggest a contracted elimination rather than personal revenge. This was business, not emotion. By 5:30 a.m. on March 14th, all physical evidence of Lira Montemayor had been eliminated from Sheikh Zahir's property. Her room was thoroughly cleaned, her few possessions removed, her name deleted from staff scheduling software. Her actual suitcase, containing journals, photographs, and personal items, was incinerated in the villa's private waste disposal facility. Her phone was professionally wiped and discarded in a shopping mall garbage bin across the city. Within the household, staff were informed that Lira had departed suddenly for a family emergency. When Yasmin, the Moroccan cook, asked about contact information to check on her welfare, she was sharply informed that former employees are not household concerns. What Zahir couldn't erase, however, was the absence of any record showing Lira Montemayor departing the United Arab Emirates. No passport was scanned at any airport or border crossing. No airline manifested her as a passenger on any flight to Manila. No immigration record documented her exit from the country where she would supposedly disappear from. Meanwhile, in the Philippines, Miko Montemayor became increasingly concerned when his sister missed their scheduled Sunday call on March 17th. His attempts to reach her went unanswered. Messages to her employer received brief responses claiming she had left the position for personal reasons, with no forwarding information. "I knew something was wrong immediately," Miko later testified to Philippine authorities. "Lira would never leave without telling me. Never. And this story about me being hospitalized? Complete fabrication. I was healthy, attending classes every day." His desperate calls to the Philippine Embassy in UAE, the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, and finally the recruitment agency that had placed Lira all met with bureaucratic responses offering little hope. Without evidence of foul play, an adult woman's departure from employment was considered a personal decision requiring no investigation. 6 days after her murder, on March 20, 2024, the first physical evidence of Lira Montemayor's fate emerged. A recreational fisherman discovered partial remains washed ashore near Al Mamzar Beach Park, a female body in advanced decomposition due to marine exposure, still clad in a black uniform consistent with household staff attire. Dubai police processed the scene efficiently, cataloging a body without identification documents, jewelry, or distinguishing marks beyond a small tattoo on her right ankle, a stylized sun partially obscured by water damage. The preliminary report listed the case as unidentified female migrant worker, probable drowning, a designation that typically results in minimal investigative resources. The body was transferred to the Dubai police morgue, where it would remain unidentified for critical days during which electronic evidence Lira had carefully preserved would begin its journey toward exposure. On March 18th, after Lira failed to log into her cloud account for 3 consecutive days, the automated security protocol she had established executed perfectly. Access permissions transferred to the email address she had designated Yasmin's personal account, created specifically for communication with family in Morocco rather than her employer-monitored work address. The notification arrived while Yasmin prepared lunch in the villa kitchen. Cloud access granted per security settings. User inactive for 72+ hours. Initially confused, she ignored the message. That evening, after her duties concluded, curiosity led her to investigate from her private device. What she discovered was approximately 18 hours of audio recordings, meticulously organized by date and location, documenting not just Sheikh Zahir's exploitation of staff, but his explicit admissions of past arrangements and disposal of problematic employees. "I couldn't believe what I was hearing at first," Yasmin later told investigators through an anonymous intermediary, his voice discussing women like inventory, planning how to remove them once they became difficult, laughing about their naivety in believing his promises. And there was Lira's voice too, professional, respectful, never antagonistic, just documenting what was happening around her. Over the next 24 hours, Yasmin made a decision that placed her own safety at risk. Using public Wi-Fi to avoid tracking, she copied the files onto a USB drive and contacted Migranti International, a Manila-based organization advocating for overseas Filipino workers' rights. Through encrypted communication, she transmitted the complete audio archive with a simple message: "Lira Montemayor has disappeared. These recordings are why. Please help find her." On March 20th, the same day Lira's body was discovered, but before it was identified, the first audio clip was strategically released through Migranti's channels. The 47-second recording captured Sheikh Zahir's voice clearly stating, "As if a housekeeper could ever be more than a warm body in the dark." The impact was immediate and explosive. Within hours, The hashtag Voice of Lira trended across Filipino social media platforms. News organizations in Manila picked up the story, broadcasting portions of the audio with Zahir's face prominently displayed alongside Lira's employment photo. For those of you wondering if wealth and power will once again escape accountability, stay with us. Act V reveals how Lira's voice, the only weapon she possessed, shook the foundations of systems designed to protect men like Sheikh Zahir Al-Mansur. Subscribe now to receive notification when the next segment is released. Meanwhile, in Dubai's police morgue, the unidentified body from Al-Mansur Beach acquired a case number but little investigative attention. Just another nameless migrant worker whose death warranted documentation rather than justice. The systematic erasure of Lira Montemayor appeared complete. No passport exit, no employment record, no missing person report within UAE jurisdiction. What Sheikh Zahir couldn't anticipate was that the voice he had silenced was already traveling across continents, gathering strength with each person who heard it, building toward a reckoning that would transcend the limitations of conventional justice. Through her meticulous documentation, Lira had ensured that while her body might disappear, her testimony would endure. For domestic workers watching this who recognize patterns of isolation and control in your own employment, please remember: establish communication safety nets, maintain regular contact with family, and document concerning behavior through secure channels. Your voice matters. Your life matters. And no employment situation is worth your safety. Stay with us as we continue uncovering the truth behind the last recording. The story of a woman who understood that in a world where justice is often denied to the powerless, sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply ensuring that the truth survives. If you're still with us, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. Every view, every share helps ensure that victims like Lira Montemayor aren't forgotten, that their stories live on even when systems of power attempt to erase them. March 22, 2024. Manila, Philippines. Rain drummed against the windows of Migrante International's modest office as 5 staff members huddled around a computer speaker, listening to the voice of a dead woman documenting her own exploitation. The recordings Yasmin had transmitted 18 hours of audio capturing Sheikh Zahir Al-Mansur's calculated abuse of vulnerable employees, represented evidence so damning it seemed impossible it would go unaddressed. "We need to be strategic about this," cautioned Angelo Mendoza, Migrante's legal counsel. "If we release everything at once, they'll claim it's fabricated. We need to build credibility with smaller releases that can be verified, then escalate." Meanwhile, Lira remains missing, countered Teresa Santos, head of case management. "Time matters here. We still don't know if she's alive." What neither realized was that Dubai police had already matched the viral hashtag Voice of Lira with the unidentified body recovered from Al-Mansur Beach. A preliminary facial recognition comparison with Lira's employment photograph had yielded a possible match, but authorities had deliberately delayed confirmation pending further investigation. A bureaucratic euphemism for awaiting political guidance on how to handle a case involving a prominent Emirati citizen. The identification delay wasn't procedural but strategic, explains former Dubai Criminal Investigation Department officer Mahmoud Al-Khalifa. When cases potentially implicate individuals of significance, there's an unwritten protocol. Contain information until guidance arrives from above regarding the preferred narrative. On March 23, Migrante released a second, longer audio clip, 3 minutes of Sheikh Zahir, explicitly discussing how he managed staff members who became complications. His voice, calm and calculating, explained how previous workers had been paid off, intimidated into silence, or simply removed from the equation when they threatened his reputation. Though he never explicitly confessed to murder, the menace underlying his casual discussion of permanent solutions sent chills through listeners worldwide. The recording spread across social media platforms with unprecedented speed. Within 48 hours, #Justice for Lira had generated over 5 million posts globally. Filipino communities in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Sharjah, where approximately 750,000 OFWs formed the backbone of the service economy, began quiet demonstrations. Workers gathering silently outside the Philippine consulate during off hours, holding phone flashlights and images of Lira downloaded from news reports. Back in Naga City, Lira Montemayor remained in agonizing limbo, his sister's whereabouts unknown, her employer claiming she had left voluntarily, and government agencies offering little beyond standardized response forms. When Migranti contacted him on March 24th with news of the recordings, his reaction combined relief and horror. "That's her," he confirmed after hearing Lira's voice in the background of one clip. "That's my sister. But who's releasing these? Where is she now?" The truth would reach him in the cruelest possible way. On March 25th, Dubai police finally issued a brief statement. Authorities confirmed the remains discovered at Al Mamzar Beach on March 20th have been identified as Filipino national Lira Montemayor, 31, employed as domestic staff in a private residence. Investigation into cause of death ongoing. No mention of Sheikh Zahir. No acknowledgement of the viral recordings. No explanation for the 5-day delay in identification. Just clinical confirmation that transformed a missing person case into a murder investigation, at least in the eyes of the public, if not officially. The Philippines Department of Foreign Affairs immediately demanded access to the investigation and autopsy reports, dispatching a diplomatic delegation to Dubai within hours of the announcement. The Philippine Overseas Employment Administration suspended all recruitment licenses for agencies placing workers in UAE households, pending a comprehensive safety review. President Maria Leonor Robredo issued a statement declaring that the Philippines will not rest until justice is served for our daughter Lira. This diplomatic pressure collided with the UAE's institutional resistance to any suggestion that a prominent citizen could be implicated in a domestic worker's death. On March 26th, the Dubai Media Office released a statement characterizing the recordings as alleged audio of unverified origin, suggesting they might be technically manipulated content designed to damage the reputation of the United Arab Emirates and its leadership. If you're shocked by how quickly powerful interests mobilize to protect their own, hit that like button. Your engagement helps us continue exposing these systems of impunity that operate globally. Sheikh Zahir Al-Mansour responded to the growing scandal with calculated precision. Rather than hiding, he scheduled a press conference at the Emirates Towers on March 27th, appearing confident in a perfectly tailored suit, his expression conveying appropriate concern rather than defensiveness. "I am deeply saddened by the tragic death of Ms. Montemayor, who served in our household with distinction," he began, his English flawless and measured. "However, I categorically deny any involvement in her passing or any inappropriate conduct alleged in recordings that experts have already flagged as potentially manipulated." With practiced sincerity, he described Lira as emotionally unstable and increasingly erratic in her final weeks of employment. He claimed she had expressed romantic feelings toward him that he had gently but firmly discouraged, suggesting this rejection might explain her fabrication of false evidence before her unfortunate accident. "The timing of her departure from our employment was her choice entirely," he continued smoothly. "She requested emergency leave for a family matter, which we facilitated immediately. What happened after she left our household is a matter for proper investigation, which I fully support and encourage." This performance, combining concern, denial, and subtle character assassination, represented a textbook crisis management strategy employed when powerful men face accusations from less powerful women. By questioning Lira's mental stability while expressing sympathy for her death, Zahir positioned himself as both victim of false accusation and compassionate former employer mourning a troubled staff member. This technique of compassionate denial is particularly effective, notes public relations expert Sophia Chun. It allows the accused to appear reasonable and sympathetic while simultaneously undermining their accuser's credibility. The formula is consistent across cultures. Express sadness, question mental stability, suggest unrequited feelings, support proper investigation, while implying its conclusion should exonerate you. What Sheikh Zahir couldn't control, however, was the independent action of his wife. On March 28th, Sheikha Noura Al-Mansour unexpectedly returned from her spiritual retreat, cutting short her stay by nearly 3 months. Within 48 hours of her arrival in Dubai, her attorneys filed divorce proceedings citing moral decay and betrayal of marital trust. While the filing avoided explicit mention of Lira or the recordings, Its timing communicated volumes about Sheikh Noura's assessment of her husband's culpability. More damaging still was her decision to provide investigators with access to the villa's security footage archives, material normally considered private family property requiring court orders to access. This unprecedented cooperation from an Emirati woman of her status suggested not just marital dissolution but active assistance in building a case against her husband. The security footage, covering the period of March 10th to 14th, revealed critical evidence. Zahir discovering the recording device, his subsequent phone calls to security contractors, Lira entering the Mercedes that would transport her not to the airport but to her death. While circumstantial, this visual timeline corroborated the narrative suggested by Lira's recordings and directly contradicted Zahir's public claims about her voluntary departure. This should have been the turning point, notes human rights attorney Farida Al-Hosani. In any system prioritizing evidence over influence, this combination of audio documentation and security footage would constitute probable cause for arrest and formal charges. The fact that it didn't speaks volumes about institutional priorities. Indeed, despite mounting evidence, the Dubai Public Prosecution Office announced on April 5 that its preliminary investigation had found no evidence linking Sheikh Zahir Al-Mansour to the death of Lira Montemayor. Their statement acknowledged her death as suspicious, rather than accidental, but attributed it to unknown third parties, who had opportunistically targeted a vulnerable foreign national. This official narrative, contradicted by both audio recordings and security footage, reflected the systemic protection often afforded to powerful citizens in cases involving migrant workers. The investigation remained technically open but effectively dormant, classified as a complex case requiring extended investigation. Bureaucratic terminology for cases deliberately left unresolved. For domestic workers across the UAE, this outcome reinforced what many already understood: that justice operated differently depending on one's passport and position. Wealthy Emiratis existed largely beyond accountability, while foreign workers remained disposable resources whose lives commanded minimal investigative resources when compromised. The final confirmation of this two-tiered justice came on April 12, when Yasmin, the Moroccan cook whose transmission of Lira's recordings had catalyzed international attention, was summarily deported from the UAE for administrative violation of work visa regulations. No specific violation was cited. No opportunity for appeal was provided. Her belongings were packed by security personnel while she remained detained at an immigration facility. Then she was placed on a direct flight to Casablanca with a 5-year ban on returning to any Gulf Cooperation Council nation. They never mentioned the recordings, Yasmin later told Moroccan journalists through intermediaries, still fearful of potential retaliation. They never explicitly connected my deportation to Lira's case. They didn't need to. Everyone understood the message. Witnesses disappear. This pattern, systematic elimination of potential testimony through bureaucratic means, extended beyond Yasmin. Within weeks of Lira's death, 6 staff members from the Al-Mansour household had been either deported, reassigned to distant properties, or had their contracts terminated with substantial severance contingent on non-disclosure agreements. The villa itself underwent extensive renovation, including complete replacement of the security system, landscaping alterations that removed the rose garden, and architectural modifications to the East Wing guest suite, where Lira and Zahir had conducted their relationship. By May 2024, physical evidence of Lira Montemayor's existence within the Al-Mansour household had been meticulously erased. What remained was her voice, preserved in recordings that continued circulating despite aggressive content removal requests from UAE authorities to social media platforms. What survived was her testimony, documented with the methodical care of a woman who understood her vulnerability and created contingencies for her own silencing. If you believe stories like Lira's deserve to be told despite powerful interests trying to erase them, hit that subscribe button now. In our final segment, we'll reveal how her brother Miko faced the ultimate moral dilemma: accept compensation for his silence or pursue justice at potentially devastating personal cost. Stay with us as the last recording concludes. June 17, 2024. Naga City, Philippines. 3 months after his sister's body had been returned home in a sealed casket, Miko Montemayor sat alone in his university dormitory room, Surrounded by engineering textbooks he could no longer focus on. Grief had hollowed him from the inside, leaving a shell that moved through daily routines while his mind remained fixed on a single question. Why had the investigation stalled despite overwhelming evidence? The Philippine government's initial forceful demands for justice had gradually softened into diplomatic niceties about ongoing cooperation with UAE authorities. Media coverage had dwindled from front-page outrage to occasional updates buried in international sections. Even the once-viral hashtags had faded from public attention, the momentary global conscience already shifting to newer tragedies. The erasure happens twice, explains sociologist Dr. Elena Santos, who studies cases involving overseas workers. First, the physical erasure of the victim. Then, the systemic erasure of public memory and institutional attention. Power doesn't just silence individuals. It silences entire narratives. This second erasure was progressing with efficient precision when Miko received an unexpected delivery. A plain manila envelope hand-delivered to his dormitory by a courier who disappeared before questions could be asked. No return address. No identifying marks. Just his name written in neat block letters. Inside, Miko found 3 items. A silver locket engraved with "For Miko Love, 8 lira," a birthday gift he had last seen around his sister's neck before her departure to Dubai, a handwritten note in Arabic script, and a vacuum-sealed package containing $60,000 in unmarked US $100 bills. The note, translated by his university Arabic professor, contained just 5 words: "Silence is the price of peace." No signature, no explicit threat. Just the unmistakable message that this money, approximately 3 times what Lira would have earned during her entire 2-year contract, represented compensation not just for her death, but for her brother's continued silence about the circumstances surrounding it. Blood money has a long tradition in many cultures, notes legal ethicist Dr. James Morrison. But what makes this case particularly disturbing is the absence of any admission of responsibility. This wasn't formal diet paid in acknowledged atonement for wrongful death. This was effectively a bribe disguised as compassionate assistance, purchasing silence while maintaining deniability. The ethical dilemma confronting 19-year-old Lira Montemayor was nearly impossible. Accept money that could secure his education and future but implicitly abandon his sister's justice, or reject it and continue a fight against opponents with limitless resources and institutional protection. "I couldn't sleep for days," Miko later confided to a trusted professor. "Every time I looked at that money, I felt like I was selling my sister. But every time I thought about sending it back, I heard 8 Lira's voice telling me to finish school, that my education was why she went to Dubai in the first place." This moral crucible, forcing victims' families to choose between practical survival and principled justice, represents another form of systemic violence against vulnerable populations. The choice itself becomes a weapon, ensuring that even those who accept compensation do so with lasting psychological damage. Miko sought guidance from multiple sources: the Philippine Department of Foreign Affairs, legal aid organizations, Catholic priests, and finally Migranti International, the NGO that had initially released Lira's recordings. Each consultation yielded the same sobering assessment. Pursuing justice against Sheikh Zahir al-Mansour was virtually impossible given UAE jurisdictional control, diplomatic complications, and the systemic protection afforded to Emirati elites. "We can continue advocacy," Migranti's legal counsel advised him during a June meeting. "But you should understand the reality. No case against him will proceed in UAE courts without political will that doesn't exist. Pursuing this further could endanger other OFWs currently working in the region." This last warning carried particular weight. Local officials in Naga City had already approached Miko with friendly advice that continuing to press the case could result in complications for future deployment. Bureaucratic language suggesting that his activism might prompt UAE authorities to restrict hiring Filipino workers, affecting thousands of families dependent on Gulf remittances. The ultimate hostage situation. Human rights advocate Maria Elena Flores describes it. Communities become complicit in silencing victims because their economic survival depends on maintaining positive relationships with countries where abuse occurs. Individual justice becomes sacrificed for collective necessity. If you're disturbed by how economic vulnerability creates impossible choices for victims' families, hit that like button. Your engagement helps us continue exposing these painful realities that seldom receive mainstream attention. On July 8, 2024, after weeks of agonizing deliberation, Lira Montemayor made his decision. He deposited the money into a special account earmarked exclusively for his education expenses. The same day, he filed paperwork to legally change his surname from Montemayor to Del Rosario, his maternal grandmother's family name, effectively severing the public connection between himself and the viral case that had briefly captured global attention. "I'm not abandoning her," he explained in a private journal entry found later. "I'm surviving to remember her. If I destroy my future fighting unwinnable battles, her sacrifice becomes meaningless. The system wants both of us erased. At minimum, I can ensure one of us continues existing." This pragmatic choice, prioritizing survival over symbolic resistance, reflects the impossible situation facing many victims of powerful perpetrators. Justice systems designed to protect established interests leave the vulnerable with options ranging from bad to catastrophic, forcing practical compromises that perpetuate cycles of impunity. In Dubai, Sheikh Zahir Al-Mansour's life continued with minimal disruption despite the international scandal surrounding Lira's death. While the divorce proceedings initiated by Sheikh Noura resulted in significant financial settlement, his political and business positions remained largely intact. By September 2024, he had resumed public appearances at Emirate Council functions, his presence generating only occasional references to the unfortunate controversy, now relegated to the past. The villa in Jumeirah, site of Lira's exploitation and the launching point of her final journey, underwent extensive renovation, emerging with a new security team, new domestic staff, none from the Philippines, and modified architecture that eliminated spaces associated with previous, unfortunate events. On January 15, 2025, exactly 3 years after Lira's arrival in Dubai, Sheikh Zahir married his second wife, Amira bint Khalid Al Maktoum, a distant cousin from a politically connected family. Wedding photographs published in Gulf Society magazines showed him smiling confidently, surrounded by Dubai's elite, wearing the same distinctive cologne he had worn the night he first kissed Lira in the Rose Garden. The ability of wealth to facilitate this kind of rehabilitation represents perhaps the most disturbing aspect of power dynamics in criminal justice, observes forensic psychologist Dr. Samira Nader. Not just escaping legal consequences, but erasing social consequences, returning to privileged existence as if nothing occurred, while victims and their families remain permanently altered by trauma. For domestic workers in the UAE, however, Lira's story continued reverberating through informal channels despite official silence. Her name became shorthand for warning in Filipino community networks. "Don't be Lira'd" meant refusing special treatment from employers. "Check for recorders" became dark humor acknowledging the surveillance often deployed against vulnerable staff. Most significantly, a quiet revolution in safety protocols emerged among OFW communities. Workers established buddy systems requiring daily check-ins, created code words to signal distress during monitored phone calls, developed decentralized warning networks about potentially abusive employers, and maintained emergency escape funds separate from regular remittances. If her death saved even one worker from similar fate, Lira would consider it worthwhile, Miko reflected during a rare interview granted to a Filipino-American documentary filmmaker in 2026. She always put others before herself. Even her final actions, documenting abuses that might help others rather than simply escaping herself, reflected that selflessness. By this time, Miko had completed his engineering degree, graduated with honors using the money that had once felt like betrayal but he had transformed into tribute. He had secured employment with a sustainable development firm in Manila, designing water purification systems for rural communities. He had built a life that honored his sister's sacrifice while ensuring her death had not extinguished both their futures. On the third anniversary of Lira's death, March 14, 2027, Miko visited the Overseas Filipino Workers Memorial Wall in Manila's Rizal Park. This monument, inscribed with names of OFWs who died while employed abroad, had added Lira's name among 723 others from that year alone, silent testimony to the human cost of an economic system dependent on exported labor. The final scene of our investigation finds him there, placing a single white sampaguita flower, the Philippine national blossom known for its sweet fragrance and resilience, beneath his sister's engraved name. Unlike the ostentatious floral displays surrounding more publicized cases, this simple offering carried more intimate significance. Sampaguita had been their mother's favorite, the flower Lira had once hoped to plant around that small clinic they had dreamed of opening together. "You were never his," Miko whispered, echoing words he had written in countless unsent letters since receiving that envelope of silence money. "You were always ours, always mine." In this simple declaration lies the most profound truth of Lira's story, that ownership, whether through employment contracts or emotional manipulation or even murder, remains ultimately an illusion. That human dignity, though violated, cannot be permanently erased. That voices silenced physically may continue speaking through recordings, through memories, through lives altered by brief encounters with their courage. The most powerful aspect of Lira Montemayor's legacy isn't the scandal that briefly captured global attention, reflects migration rights advocate Josefina Reyes. It's the quiet revolution in safety practices among vulnerable workers. It's the increased scrutiny of employment agencies. It's the ongoing conversation about power imbalances in domestic work. Systems don't change through single prosecutions, but through accumulated awareness that eventually renders certain abuses culturally unacceptable. For viewers disturbed by this story, remember that approximately 11 million domestic workers, primarily women, labor in the Middle East under the kafala sponsorship system that enabled Lira's exploitation and complicated justice after her death. Their vulnerability isn't accidental but structural, designed to maximize employer control while minimizing worker protection. Yet against these overwhelming odds, resistance continues in small, significant ways. Workers sharing warnings through coded messages, families maintaining communication networks to detect unusual silence, advocacy organizations documenting patterns of abuse, and individuals like Lira Montemayor making the ultimate sacrifice to expose truth's power would prefer hidden. If this story has affected you, please share it with others who need to hear it. Leave a comment with your thoughts, because as long as there are those willing to listen, the stories of the invisible will continue finding voice, even after their final recording.